This week's audio file is a bit more erudite and serious than usual, but in my quest to find something new and refreshing for this week, I gravitated to a book in my library by the eminent architecture critic Ada Louise Huxtable, who won the Pulitzer Prize for Criticism in 1970. She was the architecture critic for the Wall Street Journal from 1997 to 2012. Through the years, she became such an important figure for the architectural world that she served on numerous juries and committees, including as a juror for the Pritzker Architectural Prize and the Premium Imperiale of Japan. I was honored to have known her as both a client and a good friend, and was always in awe of her writing and infinite charm. As a born and bred New Yorker, the skyline of New York was a frequent topic of her writing. This piece was excerpted from her 1993 book, The Tall Building, Artistically Reconsidered. I hope you find it interesting. The skyscraper and the 20th century are synonymous. The tall building is the landmark of our age. As a structural marvel that breaks the traditional limits on mankind's persistent ambition to build to the heavens, the skyscraper is this century's most stunning architectural phenomenon. It is certainly its most overwhelming architectural presence. Shaper of cities and fortunes, it is the dream, past and present, acknowledged or unacknowledged, of almost every architect. From the Tower of Babel onward, the fantasies of builders have been vertical rather than horizontal. Frank Lloyd Wright, caustic critic of cities, could still project a mile-high skyscraper when the futurists proclaimed an energetic new world. It was in the form of streamlined, soaring towers. These flamboyant visions, full of pride and prejudice, have released architectural talents and egos from the rule of reason and responsibility. But the question of how to design the tall building has never really been resolved. It continues to plague, disconcert, and confound theorists and practitioners alike. The answers were first sought in models of the past, which were later rejected, and then still later rediscovered, carrying reputations up and down with vertiginous regularity. At any point in the cycle, the arguments have an air of messianic conviction, fueled by equal amounts of innocence and ignorance. In the final analysis, the results are controlled less by any calculated intent than by those subtle manipulators of art and ideas, taste, fashion, and status. The cycles of taste and the evaluation of the product are complicated further by the fact that architecture, like other arts, has not been free from the ideological politics, cliques, and skillful and often venomous ad hominem attacks that are a curious and constant part of the art world. This fact has never been more obvious than it is in architecture today. There is a kind of guerrilla intellectual warfare operating from academia to the media, motivated by something that is unique to architecture, the direct connection between the bases of power and extremely lucrative work. Nowhere are the battle lines more clearly drawn than on the skyline. The modernist, postmodernist camps are in a hand-to-hand, building-to-building, polemic-to-polemic combat on a huge scale. The postmodernists as intent on breaking rules and heads as on pursuing artistic frontiers. The script is familiar. Heroes are turned into villains, and the overthrow of the old regime is accompanied by the savaging of its leaders and the ravages of cultural revolution. The sound of smashing idols is everywhere. All this is not news. The swings of art and taste are as certain as the seasons, and men with ideas who hope to change the world tend to behave no better than those who merely suffer the consequences. But in this conscientious intellectual and artistic atmosphere, the skyscraper is being discussed and dissected with more intensity than at any time since the name was coined for a multi-storied office building sometime around 1890. The revisionists are busy rewriting history in terms of omission and rediscovery, which is fine, and they are also rewriting the rules of skyscraper design, which is not quite so acceptable or admirable. In the process, the right lessons are often discarded for the wrong ones. In its most familiar and exhilarating aspect, the skyscraper has been a celebration of modern building technology, but it is just as much a product of zoning and tax law, the real estate and money markets, code and client requirements, energy and aesthetics, politics and speculation. Not least is the fact that it is the biggest investment game in town. With all of this, and often in spite of it, the skyscraper is still an art form. The tall building has that in common with all major works of architecture consciously conceived in aesthetic terms. Every radical advance or conservative retrenchment that has been proclaimed as the latest revolution of truth and beauty has actually been devoted to a single, unchanging, unifying idea and purpose: the search for a skyscraper style. The tall building has been designed well and even brilliantly in many different ways, and the exotic variety that marks the best of the tall buildings is inconsistent and irreconcilable in theoretical or doctrinaire terms. There are not, and never have been, any immutable rules. There is more than one way to skin a skyscraper. Contrary to accepted opinion and the respected critical texts, there have been many appropriate and legitimate responses to the conflicting cultural forces of our time. It is the rare architect who does not hope in his heart to design a great building, and for whom the quest is not a quiet, consuming passion. Architects talk about little else to their peers. They seem obsessed with the aesthetic implication of their design in word and print. A good deal less is said about this in the client boardroom, where the architect tells it not the way it is, but the way it sells. There are some extraordinary reasons given for some extraordinary stylish flourishes. But because architecture is a practical art, and practical men pay the bills, the search for style has been rationalized and camouflaged not only to suit the prevailing intellectual fashion, but to provide client reassurance that nothing so arcane is influencing efficiency and the financial bottom line. It is the singular architect, in fact, someone like Philip Johnson, who can walk in and tell corporate directors that they are getting art and get away with it. But in his case, personality and product together constitute the art form.